I didn't get to read a little bit out of my Harriet Tubman book. Harriet Tubman is a very famous, what role did she play in the Underground Railroad?
Moses.
Raise your hand. Moses, and what was she as far as what her job was? She was a conductor, right. She first escaped herself, right? She was a runaway slave. And then she went back down south another 19 times to rescue her family and other people, okay? And this part is about her finally escaping and then what she did after that. Traveling on the Underground Railroad, Harriet finally crossed into Pennsylvania, where slavery was illegal. It was 1849, and she'd spent nearly 30 years as a slave. So she wasn't a young girl at that point. She was getting older. That was now behind her, and Harriet began to make plans to rescue her family. So as soon as she escaped, her first thought was to go back, even though it was so very dangerous, and help others come too. She got a job in Philadelphia in a hotel kitchen and saved money to pay for a secret trip back down south. Harriet attended the meetings of a group that helped runaways through the Underground Railroad and met a man named William Still. William Still was an African American who devoted his life to helping slaves escape to freedom. And this is a picture of him.
A real one?
Yep, a real one.
Which they found?
And he found out that Harriet's sister Mary was about to be sold. Now, Harriet knew where Mary was, but once she was sold, Harriet may never be able to find her again. Think about it. If it comes back to you, raise your hand. They formed a plan to get Harriet to Baltimore, okay, on the Underground Railroad, and Mary and her husband and their 2 children sailed north of Baltimore, hidden in a small boat. Harriet sneaked south to meet them, and a week later they were all free. Then the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was passed, and what that said then was that slaves who escaped north, people in the north were then obligated to find them, catch them, and send them back. So at that point, going north, the northern states, wasn't necessarily safe. They could still be caught and sent back. So then they had to get out of the United States and go to heaven. You all remember where heaven is? Canada. That way, hold the thought, they could be safe. Okay? Anyone, according to the Fugitive Slave Act, anyone who helped slaves would be fined $1,000 and sent to jail. It was no longer safe then to stop in Pennsylvania, and they had to continue north to Canada. So after rescuing her sister's family, Harriet successfully transported her brother James and 2 friends to freedom with the help of Thomas Garrett, who was the most famous of all the Underground Railroad station masters. In 1851, Harriet planned a 3rd trip back to Maryland for her husband John. You all remember about John? Yeah. John was actually a free man, but he was down in enslaved states, and she escaped, so she was going to go back down and get him. But when she arrived, she found out that he had married another woman. She went all the way down there, great risk and danger, to get John and bring him back, and he had already found somebody new. But she refused to be hurt and to waste her efforts, so instead she brought other slaves up with her. She soon became very famous, and Southern slaves knew about Moses, who in ancient times had freed his people from slavery in Egypt. They sang about him in spiritual, special songs, and they began to call Harriet Moses because she too helped her people escape from slavery. On her 4th trip south, Harriet planned to help only her brother and his wife, but instead she brought 11 passengers to safety in Philadelphia. Can you imagine trying to go through those routes that the conductors went, through the marshes, through the rivers, to the safe houses, with 11 people, and keep them all safe? That's a lot, and she got all 11 of them safe to Canada. Along the way, one of the slaves was so scared that he wanted to go back. And Harriet was afraid that if he went back, he would be threatened and tortured, and he would tell about the people that had helped along the way and put all of them in jeopardy. So she pulled out a pistol, put it right in his head, and she said, "Dead men tell no tales." What does that mean? Raise your hand if you think you know what that meant. What?
Tell people.
Or what?
Dead people can't tell anyone else.
So if he was going to go back, she was going to have to kill him, because she was not going to let him go back and put everyone else in jeopardy. So he changed his mind and decided to stay with the group and head north. Very good decision. And in June of 1857, she made her most daring trip of all to free her parents. She purchased a train ticket and traveled in broad daylight on the train with them. And then, even though a reward of $40,000 had been offered for her capture, she still took that risk. Her parents were too old to walk all the way to Canada, through the marshes, through the rivers, through the woods. It was just too hard for them. So Harriet also put a board across an old set of wheels and made a wagon, and she hitched it to a plow horse and rode them out the rest of the way. And when they got up north, they went to Thomas Garrett's home. He was the most famous station master of the time, and he praised her parents for raising such a wonderful, brave, and kind-hearted daughter. And then, when she was too old to go back down anymore and make any more trips, one of the U.S. senators, who was sympathetic to the slaves, sold her his house for a very, very small price. He wanted to give it to her, and she didn't want to take charity, so he sold it to her. And she made little payments over the years, and that's where she lived until she died.